Hello, peoples, and welcome to Esoterica Cinema, the program where we take films and discuss the hell out of them. My name is Jason Peters, and with me, as always, is the man who built his own high-speed motorcycle and now has just 3 toes on each foot. That's right, Mr. Ryan Seybold.
That's 3 Toes Johnson to you, Jason. 3 Toes Johnson is my street name.
But we're not here to talk about your weird, creepy feet. No, we're here to talk about a movie. Ryan, do you have a description for us, sir?
I do. Today's film kicks off our miniseries covering some classic anime films with perhaps the granddaddy of them all, Akira from 1988. Based on a manga series that ran in Young Jump magazine from 1982 to 1990, Akira drops us in the middle of a fictional city, Neo-Tokyo, in 2019 after the results of World War III. We follow Kaneda, leader of a teenage biker gang, and his fellow orphan pseudo-little brother Tetsuo. On one of their outings to protect their district, Tetsuo crashes his bike into a child with strange abilities, and soon after, he gains these abilities for himself. Captured by the military for testing, Tetsuo's powers strengthen beyond anyone's wildest imagination to surpass those of the fabled psychically imbued Akira. The film was written and directed by Katsuhiro Otomo, who was also behind the scenes of the manga series. It clocked in at an insane budget for its time of around $10 million or so, and completely raised the bar for what anime films could be. With all that said, as our resident cyberpunk and anime fan, I have to ask you as always, Jason, what did you think about this movie, bud?
Ryan, I am going to be happy to tell you I am so excited to talk about this film at length here today. It's so much fun, so much meat on this bone here.
Absolutely.
And we'll start, as we always do, with our opening statements. By the way, also just want to say for anybody watching and to you as well, Ryan, like gonna go ahead and interchange Akira and Akira throughout the course of this, because like they said it so many times that way in the movie that like now it's just been like drilled in my head as like Akira.
Yes.
Akira is unabashed sci-fi action at its absolute best, man. It possesses all of the fantastic visuals and inventive world building that you want from the genre, coupled with these insane high-octane chase sequences, expansive and heady themes, and what I personally consider to be one of the best musical scores in the history of cinema.
Wow.
Now, admittedly, the characters themselves, yeah, I know. Characters themselves are not incredibly deep, I will say, but director Katsuhiro Otomo's vision certainly is, and has plenty to say about the nature of Earth's spirit and how it relates to the evolution of mankind. Color palette is rich, varied, using everything from deep blacks to bright neon to even soft pastels, often all at the same time. Even the gory violence is somehow made to be beautiful. I loved every second of this film. Believe it's one of science fiction's finest movies, animated or otherwise. Ryan, how about you, good sir?
Jason, I hadn't seen this film in many years, so I was curious if it held up over time. The answer is a resounding yes. I'm assuming many of our audience will agree when I say this was one of my earliest experiences with an anime feature film when I was young. As great of a film as it is, it's one of those movie experiences that the more you learn about it, the more you appreciate it, including how the film was mostly animated on the ones, meaning they literally drew out 24 cell frames per second of film, giving the motion its crisp detail. Also, from the taillights of their street bikes to the neon signs and even gunfire, the use of lighting in this film was astounding. The dystopian city of Neo-Tokyo comes to life with insane wide shots that will make your jaw drop when you realize each window in every high-rise building was hand-painted. But pulling all that together was a solid story of friendship and brotherhood at the end of the world as we know it. Some would argue that the film wasn't without some flaws though, as it only covered a small fraction of the original story on which it's based, even leaving out the conclusion, as the manga series wasn't finished until 2 years after this movie's release. But having not read the manga, it clocks in at around 2,000 pages, so clear your schedule for that one. I do feel like this did a suitable job for the casual viewer like myself, and the open-ended conclusion had me cheering, "Oh, Kaneda!"
Absolutely. Yeah, no, definitely, man. By the way, I mean, I know it had to leave some stuff on the page, but let's also acknowledge, like, this is a full-on 2-hour animated film. Like, that is a very substantial length of time. You know, if most of these things run 75 to 90 minutes at the most. So, I mean, look, I probably could have used 2 hours more just because I loved the film, but, like, I think 2 hours is a very good amount of time for this story. So let's go ahead and dive into what makes Akira so special. And the first aspect of the movie that I would like to talk about is actually the screenplay, which is going to include both of the story and narrative itself, as well as the world building that kind of surrounds it, right? This is a wonderful screenplay by Katsuhiro Otomo, and Itzo Hashimoto, and it fleshes out a fully realized and also fully militarized Neo Tokyo
yes.
while exploring the transcendental energies of Earth and humanity that would also be responsible for the evolution or like universal rebirth of the species. And like these are all concepts that personally I just love diving into head first, like huge, expansive, what is the building block matter material of life? It's the same reason that I love Neon Genesis Evangelion and specifically End of Evangelion, which like goes into much of the same sort of subject matter. And it's also something that due to the financial realities of filmmaking, I find that it's often like most impressively achieved through animation, right? Just because it's so much easier to sit there and draw, some crazy being from space or mutated thing than it is to like, try to bring that to life in a, real life setting, in a live action setting. So I appreciated that they sort of utilized, what the medium of animation could offer in ways that make it most unique. Ryan, what did you think about the screenplay? Like, what aspects did you personally respond to?
No, I absolutely agree. You read things like how Otomo was inspired by films like Blade Runner and stuff like that for world building and kind of the neon-soaked vibes in the background and all that. I would argue, and I know this is heresy, but I would argue I like this a little better. And that's not knocking Blade Runner or taking anything away from that. I just think it's easier to play in the realms of the fantastic, when you're dealing with animation, because you could do anything.
Sure.
The explosions could be as big as you want. The motorcycles can go as fast as you want. And then just with all of the supernatural powers or psychic abilities of Tetsuo and the Esper children and so forth, all that felt fully realized in the animated world. Tetsuo is arguably the protagonist, even though he's a complicated protagonist with villain tendencies and becomes kind of the antagonist by the end of the film. It was kind of a crazy story arc, what he was doing, playing with those roles, those typical character roles. Otomo was quoted as really being inspired by films of the 1970s, the new cinema or the auteur movement, whatever you want to call it.
I know, that was so funny. I would not have thought those were the films that would have like inspired this one, right?
Right. Yeah. So he was playing with films like Dog Day Afternoon and Midnight Cowboy and all these films that had complicated heroes and weird story arcs and didn't really have a clear-cut protagonist antagonist throughout the film. And so this kind of mimicked that. Whereas it's my understanding that anime and manga up to this point, or at least up to 1982 when he was writing his manga that this is based on, they were very much more like comic books in the sense that they had clear-cut heroes and people that saved the day. Good was good, bad was bad. And he was like, I kind of want to play in this murky area that 70s cinema was so good at. Also, you're following multiple storylines without it feeling overpacked or convoluted. Now, again, I guess one of the chief criticisms of this was that it didn't include the conclusion because it hadn't been written yet in a very Game of Thrones George R.R. Martin kind of way. He finished the movie before he had finished the story. But I guess when you see Kaneda ride into Neo Tokyo at the end of the film, there's a whole other chapter of shit that goes on within Neo Tokyo where he rallies for control and fights with rival gangs and so forth. So, I mean, it could warrant a sequel. That's what some people have been hailing for a long time. I think it's kind of past that. It's like, when you hear for a sequel to Akira, to me, it's like asking for Back to the Future 4, or, you hear these clamorings every once in a while, like, they're going to do this and Tom Holland's going to be Marty McFly. It's like, man, I hear what you're saying and I appreciate the devotion to the story, but kind of kick rocks with that. Like this, it's good just the way it is. Just leave it be, because all they could do is fuck up its legacy, in my personal opinion.
Yeah. Well, and I also feel like, it kind of works for this type of story, having the sort of open-ended, ambiguous sort of thing, aspect where, because really at the end of Akira, the movie, like once all is said and done, what we're left with is basically the birth of a brand new universe, right? That is based off of all of this matter. That's a combination of Tetsuo and Akira and the Esper children and all of that, So to sort of go into what that looks like and do like, the genesis of universe 2 or whatever, or how, universe 500, whatever the film's trying to tell you. Right. But the genesis of this new universe doesn't seem like it would be an especially satisfying ending for it. It reminds me very much of the ending of 2001. It's not about what happens after, humanity ascends or humanity evolves. Like, it's about the path to get to that evolution. Sure. And the evolution itself is the conclusion of that particular story. So I think it works really well in the context of this movie. And again, we've got 2 hours of substance throughout this entire film. So, I didn't feel like it lacked for me. I actually really enjoyed just the fact that, again, we're starting this brand new universe. That's kind of, Neon Genesis does something similar. So it's not out of the realm of these types of stories.
I always like those open-ending sci-fi things, like, the Planet of the Apes or anything Rod Serling would write for Twilight Zone. They always would do that. And just kind of, they told their story, you get in, get out.
Yeah, and one of the things that I liked about the movie as well, just sort of the journey along the way, was like the immediacy of the narrative. For such a large film, something like this would often usually span, decades or centuries, right? Or multiple timelines, kind of like we were talking about with 2001.
Sure, absolutely. It's a very well-paced film. There's always something going on. And because you're jumping through multiple plot lines and following different character arcs, the Colonel, all the government stuff that's going on behind the scenes, obviously the biker gangs, all the little flirtations and stuff between Kaneda and Kei, you never overstay your welcome in each little chapter of the story, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And I also want to quickly add too that one of the other things I think that makes the story work so well and keeps it driving forward in such like a strong manner, like you're talking about, is it's got a really strong sense of mystery. It's kind of easy to take for granted after, we've seen it several times. I think this is probably my 4th viewing of the film or something over the last, couple decades, probably. But as I was sort of just watching it through like this more critical lens, I noticed how well and what a good job the film did of, keeping its cards close to its chest, none more so than the actual Akira character, who isn't revealed until the very 3rd act. And it's almost this sort of like Third Man style, like, who is Akira? What is Akira? They keep talking about Akira, whether it's, the Esper children or whether it's the military or certain, there's a lot of attention brought to Akira, talked about Akira. We know that in some way, Akira was responsible for the explosion that starts off the movie that represents World War III, but we don't really learn exactly who and what it is until that very end, when the reveal is made with, that he's basically, his corporeal body is dead and gone. And now we're just basically looking at, a bunch of like nerve endings and various, spinal fluids and things of that nature. That's kind of all that's left of him. But also that speaks to the fact that, Akira has basically transcended his body, but the soul and the mind of this thing still exist. The children, we don't really know exactly what's the reason for their disfigurement. Who do they represent? What are they? Are they different? Are they actual children? Are they some sort of, representation or visual metaphor? And then we learn, no, these are actually these kids who have been exposed to this Akira life force and are basically being medicated by the government to keep them from what happens at the end to Tetsuo from occurring. So again, the film kind of doesn't let you know about a lot of this stuff until we get to that final act and kind of reveals its secrets. And that's just something that the film does very well that I think can be overlooked.
But I never felt lost. Like, I never felt frustrated.
Correct, yeah.
That they were giving me enough along the way and keeping me so engaged with the action and the charisma of all the characters and all of the, stuff that's going on that, by the time you get to the end, it was like, oh yeah, I didn't know that. I should have been more concerned about that, but I wasn't because I was having so much fun.
Now, let's move on to what I would say is arguably the film's most impressive aspect. And I teed this up at the top, and that's the score. And, I meant exactly what I said. I literally do think this is one of the best scores in the history of cinema, both technically as well as emotionally. I think that it's got a really interesting aesthetic that's best described as ancient Japan meets modern Japan, let's say. You've got these very traditional instruments that kind of remind you of sort of like feudal Japan, right? But they're being combined with what are then the most modern synthesizers and computers that they have in music, to the point that technologies were created just to allow them to be able to make this score. Like without certain of those technologies, like this score could not exist. So it's very interesting to note that this wasn't something that happened by accident, right? It wasn't like, oh, we were just going for, a pretty decent score and it came out amazing. Like, no, they like went all in, devoting tons and tons of resources to the creation of this score. So Ryan, did you happen to see what a number of those things were like, or did you not have like the special features? Did you not go as much into the score? Like, did you see the technologies and stuff that they did?
No, I mean, I had the Dolby 5.1, soundtrack or whatever that I put on.
By the way, real quick, did you watch this in Japanese subtitle or US dub?
I have done both throughout my Vibe viewings. This time I watched it dubbed.
Yeah, I did the same. I actually started off with Japanese, and then because we have to like take so many notes as we're watching the movie, like every time I would look down, I would be like, God damn it, I just missed another minute worth. And then I was like rewinding so often. I was like, we're not doing this. Like, yeah. But the interesting thing is I'm sure you, or maybe you didn't, but like, did you notice how there was the original 1988 dub and then these DVD restorations have a completely new dub that was done in 2001?
Correct. I had no problems with the dubbing, although I did kind of miss out on something I did want to pay more attention to, or wish I would have paid more attention to upon researching the film, was how they pre-scored. Maybe this is where you were taking the conversation, but they pre-scored the film, meaning that they recorded all the voices in Japanese first and then animated to the voices, which is something Disney does a lot. It's a high budget way to do it because it takes a lot more attention to detail to match the mouths and stuff versus asking the actors to just mimic the performances that are already there and just do like almost like an ADR.
Yeah. Now, I will say that as far as the dub, so the visual restoration was done by Funimation with Kanawata, or I forget there was another company that they worked with. The 2001 dub was actually done by Pioneer Studios.
Oh, okay.
Who there was their own effort, and that was taken over from the original 1988 Streamline dub. And like, it is so much better. We'll get to the dub in a second. So I do want to just first talk about a little bit more of the aspect of the score. Now, the score was written by Shoji Yamashiro, and he had a band that has been doing these very lush compositions for a while. I think they were on their like 10th album when the director reached out to them and asked them to create the music for Akira. And what's most interesting is, again, it's this perfect assemblage of like, traditional instruments that are, especially native to Japan and to a lot of the different Eastern provinces, with a lot of that just new technology that's in play. And I think that we get that so much. It's almost like it's got like the score has like this synthwave quality. But it's also, again, highlighted by a lot of these like very traditional, wooden and iron Japanese instruments. And the way that they did it is they basically created a new MIDI. They call it a micro tuner is what it was.
Okay.
But they wanted to use a specifically non-Western musical scale known as gamelan. I believe that's how you pronounce it. And it's kind of like the way, you hear about there being like when it comes to scales, there's like Western, which is what we hear in all of our music and what's mostly used. But then there's like the natural earth tones, right? That like ancient societies had based off of like the natural sounds of the earth. And that's sort of what they tune their instruments for. So that's why you can't play like traditional Japanese music on like traditional Western instruments because they use completely different scales. And there's just no way to match that tuning. So it was the same thing with synthesizers. They literally, there were no synthesizers that were tuned to this like gamelan scale. And so they came up with, it's actually a MIDI instrument, and it was called microtuners. And this allowed them to map the correct notes to the synthesizers so that they could actually then go in and use the synthesizers and computers to write the music that was going to be played by these instruments that were tuned to this unique gamelan Eastern scale.
Wow.
And so that's how they're able to basically make it, have that futuristic, or at least then futuristic synthwave vibe. But also just the richly distinct tones and feels of those wooden and iron sounds.
That's what's up. Yeah, I got to go back and pay more attention to that, dude.
I know that you really love sound. Obviously, you're a sound engineer, and so and a sound recorder. So
Well, and I
This is
really
gonna
love
be
synthwave
particularly
music.
interesting
I mean,
to go
that's
back.
been my
Yeah.
jam now for a while.
Yeah.
I would add to that the animation, which I touched on a little bit in my opening statement, and just how this was created from an artistic standpoint, in that most animated films, I didn't know this. I guess I kind of knew it, but I never really realized it. But most animated films, to save money, especially anime, are animated what they call on the twos, or every other frame. So there's only 12 animated cells per second, and in some cases less. But this was one of the first animes to animate on the ones, where, and that's where you get that crisp detail in all the motion and movement. On top of that, they actually did their prints when they would animate and photograph the animated cells or whatever to get it on film stock onto 70 millimeter film, which is absolutely unheard of. Like the fact that they would print this in 70 millimeter. The way they were able to do that, I guess, was Otomo painstakingly did hundreds and hundreds. I believe it was just shy of 800 storyboards. I think he started with over 2,000 pages of storyboards and then whittled it down to just under 800. And then based on that, he was able to edit the film before and save money on the animation. So nothing was wasted. And by the time it went to print, he felt like everything at that point would be used in the finished film. So that helped the score, that helped, all the dubbing and so forth. So just absolutely bonkers. And you talk about the colors in your opening statement. 327 colors were used in this film, including some custom colors that were invented just for this movie.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure you saw too that over the course of this entire movie, they ended up using 160,000 animation cells to make this film, which is absolutely nuts. I know that I actually recently did a review of Redline that should be coming out pretty soon. And that was an 1.5-hour movie that used 100,000 cells. And that was in 2008, 2010, something like that. So this you're going back to 1988, and it was in production for a while. So to go that far back and know that this film did 160,000 animation cells is pretty much unheard of. And that's, to your point, why we get that very not only crisp and detailed animation, but the fluidity of the motion, right?
Right.
Because again, they're doing, twice as many cells per second of film time. And so naturally there's going to be much smoother motions. And, that's why so much of that works so well.
Dude, supposedly they did true slow motion in this movie. So when they're shooting 60 frames a second or something slows down, they animated it that way. So they're literally drawing up to 60, or more frames per second to gather that slow motion, to tell your animators oh, this is going to be slow motion. So you got to give me 60 animation cells per second. And then we're going to put it on 70 millimeter film stock. Holy shit, dude. This was a huge endeavor. And, it's worth mentioning this was his first film. And he didn't make another one, I think, until 2008 with Steam Boy, if I'm not mistaken. So, yeah.
He did a few different projects. So he did a number of anthologies. So you could call them short films or something, where he did one story, 20 to 30 minute story. And then I know he has at least one live action film that he did that I want to say is a horror comedy. Okay. Might have been another one that he did. So yeah, but didn't direct another full feature-length animated film until Steam Boy in 2005 to 2008 or whenever that was.
Whatever it was,
and and everything you said is right, especially about the coloring, right? One of the things I noticed about the different coloring, right, is every time they would show a pipe underneath, in the subterranean mechanical areas that they were within, it would be red. And I think that also you see a lot of this really where these, this use of all these different colors and these distinct colors and all the ones that were, made specifically for the film, like you mentioned, is, when we see the cityscapes, right? Early on, a handful of minutes into the movie, after they leave the bar, we see the whole cityscape. It's lit up. It's where we get, sort of the Blade Runner holographic creations, and we
all
just
the
see
neon
and so much. Yeah, exactly. And, the colors can vary from scene to scene. In one scene, a film might be a gradient of sort of a purplish color to an orangish color. And then, it'll jump to a wide shot. And then all of a sudden, it's painted in pastel green, and not for a minute are we ever confused. It doesn't feel choppy. It doesn't feel unrecognizable. Like, we just understand that it's sort of an artistic decision that they've made with regards to the color scheme of it. And it keeps it very vibrant, and especially in these 4K restorations, right? Like, they've done some really exquisite work. So the 4K restoration was done by, as we mentioned earlier, Funimation, and then the other company is called Kadokawa. And it's just amazing. I mean, when you're watching on a 4K screen in HDR, it allows you to see how much the artist and the colorist explored that color palette, you know? Like, when you're getting this, you know, when this was screened back in 88, the technology didn't exist to be able to represent all 300 and something of those colors, you know? But now with the increased color space that's allowed by HDR, like, we can see all of this. And it's kind of like the first time, you know, I think I mentioned in Suspiria, you know, during our Suspiria review, where that was my first time watching the film in 4K. And it's like, wow, I like that's a film that I had seen half a dozen times going in there. And I was seeing brand new colors in that movie that I had never seen before, you know? And so it was very much the same in this screening of Akira. Thankfully, I was privileged enough to be able to watch in 4K HDR, as I know you were. And man, just every decision works with regards to all of those color decisions.
Yeah. I would add to that the lighting. The one thing that stood out to me over and over again on this viewing that I knew before, but I don't think I paid as much attention to it as I was this time, is the way they use light. I noticed it first when one of the Esper children is like escaped from the facility or whatever, and he's being dragged across the city by that guy, and he walks across like a bank of televisions. And there's that glow that he's engulfed in. He gets also silhouetted when they finally find the child, and like they're using the spotlights on him and the guy that broke him out of the facility or whatever. And just how they wash the light and use it so selectively, because it still feels like night. It doesn't wash out the frame. I mean, those are devices you could use in live action, just by manipulating light. But when you have to draw that or paint it, how do you do that? Like, I watched so many videos on how they did it, and I still don't understand how they did it. Like, it's just absolutely incredible. The gunfire in the sewers with those like hover bikes or whatever, when they're shooting those bullets out, and they're coming at them, like just the attention to detail that went into that. 24 frames a second. It's just mind-boggling, the quality. And you would think a lot of that would wear off after 30 some odd years later. You'd watch it, and I was really curious how it was going to hold up, like I said in my opening statement. But dude, it still feels like this could have been made yesterday. I
mean, dude, these restorations are so like amazing. They're literally able to go in and remove all of like the dirt and hairs and everything from the prints digitally these days, one at a time. That was one of the technologies that the restoration team was instrumental in developing. So yeah, whether they're old black and white films, whether they're old animation, just once they go through this restoration process, they feel so clean and so vibrant, and the lines are made to be so crisp and everything that, you'd be forgiven for thinking these films were made 20 or 30 years after they actually were.
I just experienced that with, if you go back a couple episodes and watch my review on Night of the Hunter, I had the exact same experience where I could not believe how slick and clean that looked and how sharp. That was, made in 1955, I believe, and just, it could have been made yesterday. But this was very much the same way. It felt very modern, and I read online, and I was very, very curious how I was going to feel about this, but I did read online ahead of watching this, that the 4K transfer was subject to something called DNR, or digital noise reduction. If you think of like, shitty Instagram filters that clean up everything but make skin look waxy and wash out a lot of the sharpness or detail, especially in your background. I've heard that, there are people that felt like this suffered from that. And so I was really nervous about it. But damn, dude, I watched this on a huge screen. And trust me, I was paying attention. All the detail was there for me.
Yeah, it's a movie that kind of thrives on just really effective creative decisions. And one of the creative decisions as well that really worked for me that they used time and time again is many of the moments would have these big giant action pieces, right? Like, structures crumbling and
Oh, yeah.
People getting disemboweled and stuff, but they would just completely take out all of the sound of the actual effects happening.
I noticed that too.
You mentioned it earlier, like it's not really like calling a ton of attention to all of these different aspects. Like it's a very confident film. Like it knows that what it's doing is impressive and interesting. And so they don't have to call your attention to everything. They'd rather have a bunch going on screen, but then, use the sound to call your attention to, the dialogue or the fight, or in some instances, the environment and the crumbling and the explosions of all of that. But it's sort of like they have like a series of levers they're pulling when it comes to the sound and the sound effects,
Yeah, the silence and the vacuum. You're absolutely right. That was something that got me by the throat. I didn't remember that being so well utilized.
Yeah, definitely. And they do it right off the bat. Like it's one of the first creative decisions we see, where we see the original Tokyo explosion occur, and there's absolutely no sound there whatsoever. And then, of course, we come right back and there's, guns a-blazing and stuff's blowing up. So one of the things that I would also like to mention is like the violence inherent in the film, because it's really interesting, right? This is actually a pretty violent movie. It's not like violent throughout, but the moments of violence do tend to hit pretty graphically.
Oh, yeah.
Like one of the gorier deaths is, you talked about it when there's the revolutionary guy who has rescued the first kid. I want to say he's number 26. And, they're running across. This is after they've passed the TVs, and then they're running through it's like a channel of some sort. And, there's all the police vehicles out there, and they throw on the spotlights, and, he fires at them, and they're like, he's got a gun. And then they just, and like, it's really quite a graphic death. And it's made even more graphic because, like you talk about, the level of detail, having those 24 actual cells per second makes it so fluid, makes it feel that much more realistic, because it's not this sort of like subconsciously choppy effect that you're seeing. And yet at the same time, it's somehow like beautiful, right? Like the film is both like disgusting and beautiful at the same time. It's gory and it's mesmerizing at the same time,
Well, Otomo has such a good handle on cinematic language too, because, I think a lesser film would have hung on the body being shot or the gunman or whatever. But he cuts away to the Esper kid's look of horror, with blood flying in the foreground and stuff like that. And the lights of gunfire flashing in his face. You get a lot of reaction shots that, though it's not afraid to show you gore, and the horrific nature of violence, it also knows when to let your imagination fill in the gaps as well, and cut away and then cut back to see the results of it and so on. So, and then, because you're playing in the sandbox of the supernatural, the ways you can portray violence sometimes are, more surreal.
Absolutely. Yeah. And to your point, the violence isn't just of the bloody variety. It also extends to the action sequences. And these are wonderfully achieved. We get these awesome highway battles between the Capsule Gang and the Clown Gang. And these are, they're very exhilarating. You get a strong sense of speed. And I don't know if you had the same reaction, but they actually reminded me of a video game that I grew up with called Road Rash. Are you familiar with this one at all?
I know that of which you speak. I didn't play it a lot, but yeah.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, it's basically just like the game where you're on a motorcycle and you meet someone else on a motorcycle, and then you have weapons and you try to like knock each other off while also trying to navigate the actual road. So now, look, these battles in Akira look much more impressive than what a Sega Genesis could pull off at the time or something like that, right? But yeah. But it did kind of remind me that. And it's also where we get, the opportunity to show off those wonderful light trails that you had talked about, right?
Oh,
From
yeah,
the taillights of the motorcycle in those early scenes, all in that neon saturated goodness that we love so much. And, also we do have to mention, just because it's one of the most famous shots of all time, the infamous Akira slide, right?
Oh,
which
that's
is such
sweet,
a small
sweet power
moment,
slide, baby. Yeah.
but it's just like it's been referenced in so much, from like Batman to Gargoyles to like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. You can find, a 3-minute video right here on YouTube just going into like all of the different
Simpsons
Akira slides that have appeared over the course of the last 20, 30 years, however long it's been. So
yeah, it's that and the Tetsuo baby monster at the end where you get, South Park or Rick and Morty has done it a couple times now.
Turning our son into an Akira? He turned himself into Akira.
This has been a well parodied or imitated film over the years. It's like, if you haven't seen it, you're going to watch it and be like, oh, that's where this is from. It's one of those moments.
I do feel like those movies that really influence other films and other mediums a lot, like they fall on like one side. Either it's because they're so dang good or they're just really, really shitty, right? And so the good thing is if you're going to want to see where a lot of this stuff comes from, this is an excellent one. You don't have to sit through crap film. Like, people aren't doing it to make fun of it. It's, a very loving sort of referential gesture that they're putting in these films. As a little tip of the old cap to Akira.
Again, I had a similar experience with Night of the Hunter. I had no idea that's where the love and hate on the hands tattoos came from. It's been in so many movies. So
yeah. And I will just say real quick, dude, I do want to give it up to that 2001 Pioneer dub. So when I had first gotten Akira, it was, way back, maybe this, existed, but I didn't get my hands on it. So it was like one of the original prints, I think on VHS. I had rented it from Blockbuster or something. And so I got like the old 1988 dub. And that was how I think the first time probably watched it. And like, it was just painful, man. Like, the voice acting is like really, it's bad. Cause like the voice acting is trash. This is before they were putting a ton of money into bringing stuff over. But also like the sound effects are really awful. The mixing sucks. Everything sounds super overmodulated. Like got this like the Darth Vader quality, but like not in a good way, right? It's just it was not a good time at the movies. So then I think my next viewing, if not two viewings, I had gone back and watched the Japanese subbed version. And so I was pretty much just always of the opinion, like, well, that's the best way to appreciate Akira is with its original Japanese voice acting. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that will feel the same, but I have to admit that the 2001 Pioneer dub, it's really well done. Everything sounds great.
Absolutely.
And then they got really legitimate voice actors. So I don't know if you saw this, but the guy who plays Canada is a dude named Johnny Young Bosch, who not only brought Vash to life in the Trigun series, doing the US dub for that, but was the second Black Power Ranger in season 2.
Oh, wow. And, that's awesome. It's Morphin time.
Hey. And, he does a great job just sort of like bringing to life that sort of like bratty street punk quality. In many ways, it's funny. The gang, the capsule gang that all the main characters belong to are kind of played like those like 1950s, right? Like the Outsiders gang, like, yeah, go sit on it, buddy.
Yeah,
like,
right.
They got that very like, thumbing their nose at all like the normies, right? And they like, drive past the people on their way to work and their motorcycles and stop them in the middle of the streets. And they're like, ha, take that, normal guy. But he does a great job with that. Hold on.
I thought it was hilarious that how lightly everybody seemed to take violence. I remember when Kaneda was talking to Kay, or somebody, I think it was Kay. I remember when Kaneda was talking to someone and he was like, "Oh, was it your first time killing someone? Like, you give it a day, you'll be fine with it." Like, it was so just casual, so nonchalant. Right? Yeah, the way everybody just handled violence in this was just so nonchalant in such a wonderful way. I could only assume, and I'm guessing here, but what I do know is right after this film came out, it was a decent success. It didn't blow the doors off of everything. It got a second life. I mean, it's made a buttload of money from people like you and me buying the 4K Blu-rays and all that stuff in home video content, rentals. But right after this came out, the Japanese economy took a huge shit. And so it was at its all-time high. post World War II, it was just, kind of trickling up, and then it just escalated in the 80s, kind of like our economy did in a similar fashion for a little while. And then also like our economy, they went through a bit of a recession in the early 90s. And so I would almost wonder if by the time they got to trying to do an international, like all their international dubs after the initial Japanese release, they might have just been out of money. And because I know that this film sent a lot of the production companies bust afterwards. I don't know if you saw, but they had a conglomeration of several different production companies that they called, I think it was called the Akira conglomerate or something like that. And it was like a few different companies that merged together and kind of threw their money in the pot to make this all come together. And so by the time they got to like, oh, we got to do an English dub. Oh, shit. So I know Steve, Steve down the road from me, he lives, he's cool. He could do that. But so by the time this came out, Japanese anime didn't really see a resurgence until the mid-90s with, like you were saying earlier, Evangelion and Ghost in the Shell, which I believe we're going to cover in this series. So, and then you've already covered, for those people that are interested, Jason did a huge, 5-part series on Evangelion. In audio format, back when we had our show
on the audio podcast,
on the audio files, but it is right here on YouTube, so you can go check that out if you're interested in our his breakdown of that. But that was kind of the resurgence of anime, because it took a while for movies like this to kind of come overseas and trickle into the home video market and stuff like that, and eventually the Western audiences really caught on to what was going on and made a new market altogether. And now we're rife with it. Like we have Crunchyroll and, all these great anime series, and, HBO's putting out new stuff via Cartoon Network all the time. And so, we're living in a good era for anime these days.
Yeah, it's easy to take for granted in 2025, but, pretty much pre-2000 to 2005, most of these series did not make it over here into the States. There just there wasn't a demand for it at the time. So it wasn't something where, hey, if we invest $500,000 in doing a really good dub, we're going to make back $2 million. And, when we send it overseas, like that market didn't exist. So because of that, there was no financial incentive for companies to really put a lot of their resources into these quality US dubs. And also, I think that's why Akira is for so many people their first foray, for those of us that are, a little bit on the older side, maybe, and like millennial and before, right? This was sort of our first introduction to anime and to anime films, because it was really the only one that had been brought over. Most of these movies did not end up coming out, let alone did they have US dubs. And if they were trash, so they weren't as enjoyable. So it's easy to forget that, we didn't have the same level of accessibility. And then again, now anime is such big business here in the States and elsewhere outside of Japan that companies can get a return on their investment for doing really high quality dubs and, throwing money at good voice actors and all of that. So, I know why that 1988 dub was what it was, but I'm really glad that since then, the market has shifted and we were able to get a really solid dub that is, that the film deserves. So.
Well, and I'll kind of wrap it up with this, but it's important that viewers know, anyone, like you said, anyone, on the younger side of things, not to sound like the creepy old man or the wise old man here, but
you kids, listen here.
Right, yeah. This was something that in the 90s you had to seek out. Like everybody had their little hole in the wall shithole video store. Like, you might find Akira or Ghost in the Shell at Blockbuster, or Hollywood Video or something, but more often than not, you'd have to go find your little mom and pop hole in the wall place around the corner in some dilapidated, strip mall that had a little anime section, and whatever they had is what you had access to, and most of it was on VHS. And you got the dubs that came with it. It was all shitty quality.
It was not expansive.
It probably survived an overseas boat trip and the tracking was all jacked, but you were just glad to see it because it was something so rare. In the same way that, all the B horror films and everything else, everybody had their little niche hole in the wall video store, like the typical Quentin Tarantino video store that had stuff like this. And especially if you lived in smaller towns like I did that weren't Los Angeles, you really had to seek this stuff out, and very little of it came across your plate, like you were saying. So by the time you got to see an Akira, it was mind-boggling. Like it was, it just opened up a whole new door of cinema, that an animation that you just didn't even know existed. I remember when I first saw this, I thought it was rotoscoped, like a Ralph Bakshi or something like that, because it just looked so different than any animation I'd ever seen. It looked more akin to a lot of the Bakshi stuff, like the Lord of the Rings or Fire and Ice or any of those, where I was like, oh, surely this is rotoscoped.
Which those were also just like adult animations, like most of our experience to animation at that point had been Disney and, some of their offshoots and all of that. So even though the Bakshi stuff, some of it's PG, some of it's R, like it's still, was mostly featuring human characters, real life scenarios, Lord of the Rings adaptation, etc. It wasn't, talking deer and genies and stuff like that.
Yeah,
so
that's fair.
Makes sense that it would kind of get related to that as well. So, but yeah, we will, again, dude, I just, I think this is a movie that just has like, both style and substance oozing out of its pores. Couldn't get enough of it. And so as we wrap up our review here, let's go ahead and do as we always do and finish up with 3 scenes. This is 3 scenes that Ryan and I believe most reflect the experience. They may or may not be our favorite scenes from the movie. They can be, but they don't have to be. It's more just about these are the scenes that represent our response in totality to the film. Ryan, as always, I will let you go first, my friend.
That's mighty kind of you. There might be some overlap here. They're kind of obvious. I would say the first hallucination of Tetsuo with the Esper kids forming the stuffed animals and everything in the child's room and all of that. That's when the film really took a turn, and just the attention to detail. Like, you really can pause that and see everything that's coming together to form the big teddy bear or all the different creatures and stuff. And shit just starts to go off the rails, but it's also just so well done and so beautiful. Next up, I would say the cityscapes and wide shots of Neo Tokyo. Can't talk enough about that. Otomo really did work very hard to make Neo Tokyo a character in this film as the backdrop and landscape. Like you were saying earlier, the explosions that happen to it, when you see buildings crumble, it's just so, so wonderful to watch. Not that they're crumbling, but just the artistic quality. And then, of course, last but not least, how could you not include the mutation of Tetsuo at the end of the film? Yes, it's often parodied or mimicked, but it's because it's so incredible to watch. We haven't really mentioned it yet, Jason, but this does dabble into the genre of body horror that we just got through covering not long ago. That gave me a whole new appreciation for body horror. So by the time you get to the mutation of Tetsuo at the end of this film, it's like, hey, body horror again. I fucking love this shit. So gotta love it. Gotta pay respect to the mutation of Tetsuo and all the parodies that it inspired. How about you, Jason?
Yeah. So funny enough, this is the first time that we've done this where we have all 3 exactly the same scenes. Usually there's like one crossover scene. Every now and then we have 2. Same exact 3 scenes for me.
No way.
Just in a slightly different order. Yeah. So the first one I have is the introduction to New Tokyo. It's about 4 minutes in. And yeah, for the same reason, it's just it's introducing Neo Tokyo as its own character. It's before the first bike fight. It's right when Canada and the capsules leave the bar. And it's where we're introduced to Canada's bike, which, is itself this very cool design and the way that it's ridden. And then, from there, it goes on to show those buildings. We get the sense of scale from some of the close-ups. It's got a little bit of almost like a Koyaanisqatsi vibe to it at times. Where it's just the music and the visuals.
Great
and,
reference.
The big Tokyo buildings, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we get into those sort of Blade Runner holographic commercial sort of images that are scattered throughout Neo Tokyo. And so, it just gives it that vibe and gives it its very specific flavor. The second scene that I have is that scene where we see those hallucinations with Tetsuo in the hospital. And in addition to just being, just purely surreal, which I love surrealism, and that's always going to play well for me. And, that's also a scene where they make that decision to remove the sound, right? Like when the little stuffed animals are first walking up the bed and they approach him, it's not like we're getting like their sounds or anything like that. So it maintains that surrealistic feel.
Did that remind you of Common Side Effects? I forgot to ask you about that. The second I saw that, I was like, "Oh shit! This is like a direct lift from Common Side Effects on HBO." Anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, I no, you're good. I didn't put I didn't make that connection there, but I totally see it now that you're bringing it up. But no, what I was gonna say is what I really liked about it is also the very end of that scene. So, we think, oh, is this just some aspect of Tetsuo's mind? Like, is he basically just tripping off some, bad red rope licorice, something like that, whatever it is? No, turns out that it's actually the children who have shown up and are trying to basically scare Tetsuo away from where they know he's ultimately going to go, which is the discovery of Akira. And what I love about it is it's kind of the one moment in the film, one of very few moments at least, where it reminds you that these are kids, right? It's not like they're adults that are trapped in small children's bodies. They're actually very much children. And so they're basically sort of like, scaring him with these toys, which is a very childlike thing, Tetsuo that is. But then as he's backing up sort of out of terror, he ends up smashing his foot on a piece of or on a glass, and the glass shatters and ends up getting stuck in his foot. And as he's pulling it out, we see like the blood start to drip off from it. And then the children become scared. And they're basically like, hey, whoa, slow down. This wasn't part of the deal. This is blood. I'm scared. I don't like this anymore. And then that's when those giant stuffed animal creatures break down to reveal the children that are inside. And I think they say something like, you're weird, we're leaving, or something like that. And then you get that like creepy shot of like the one kid who's in the wheelchair, like the Professor X floating wheelchair, who just like backs away. And so it's kind of that one moment in Akira where like the kids are actually allowed a moment to react the way children would, and I really liked that aspect of that scene.
Sure.
And then, the third is just, the visual splendor, let's say, of just that third scene where, he goes full Trapper Keeper. I'm sure all of our audience knows that that reference. If not, go check it out. And so he's absorbing everything that's around him. And by absorbing the Akira spirit, as well as ultimately Tetsuo and the children, that's where, all of their combined force and power is left to explode in Neo Tokyo and leave a bunch of devastation in its wake, but also at the same time to create this entirely new universe, that is going to leave us with at the end of the film, where we sort of go into it and we start to see some of those galaxies and stars and planets being formed. We hear him say, I am Tetsuo, and then we, end up fading to the credits. So, it's very funny that we had the exact same three scenes
Never happened
here
before. Yeah.
So Ryan, with our final scenes examined, we can go ahead and slap our formal ratings on Akira. I'll start, and this should likely come as no surprise to you or anyone else that I am giving this film the full 5 out of 5 stars.
Hell yeah,
From
buddy.
the wonderful visuals to the incredible score to the expansive stories and concepts. Every aspect of this movie is sublime and perfect, and it's a special experience every time I get to watch Akira. 5 out of 5 stars. How about for you, sir?
Same. This is one of my favorite movies. I would watch this again right now. It's brilliant. It's
Absolutely.
even more brilliant in 4K HDR. I'd never seen it that way before. It's awesome. 5 stars.
Yeah. No complaints here. So to everyone watching, if you did enjoy our review of Akira today, we invite you to like and subscribe to this video and channel. As Ryan has mentioned, this is the first of our 4-part miniseries looking at Japanese science fiction anime films. And so we look forward to diving into our other 3 here pretty soon. We're definitely going to be doing Ghost of the Shell. Got a couple other less popular ones for you to just throw in the mix. So that'll be a lot of fun. If you're feeling chatty, go ahead and leave us a comment right here on the YouTubes regarding what you thought about the movie or what you thought about our specific review. We always love to hear from you guys. So for myself, Jason Peters, and my good friend right here, Ryan Seybold, this has been Esoterica Cinema. Keep on appreciating film and enjoy the movies.